Religion is not a sign of God's presence, but it is in reality a sign of God's absence.
From Portland, Oregon, Verdict Publications presents its 1987 Summer Seminar, Farewell to Religion, with Verdict editor Robert D. Brinsmead. An Australian entrepreneur, Mr. Brinsmead has lectured extensively on 5 continents and is a lay theologian. In this session, he speaks on religion and the mediated state.
The subject for our session this morning is religion and the mediated state. Religion and the mediated state. There are 2 points that I want to make quite clear about the very nature of religion. The first is this: religion is not a sign of life, but of death. And the second, religion is not a sign of God's presence, but of God's absence. The first point, religion is not a sign of life, but of death. Religion is a fundamental characteristic of our present mortal existence. For example, it is quite clear that when death is finally overcome and man has direct access to God, there will be no religion. John said he saw no temple in the New Jerusalem. And the temple, of course, is the very symbol, the temple cult of religion. No need for it because the presence of God is there. Religion lives only where death reigns. Let's look at human existence, and we see that there are 2 indispensable things in being human. First thing is that in being human, we can't live alone. Even as the old Genesis story says, it's not good for man to be alone. We need a society, and so human beings build a culture and they build a society. And that, of course, brings social institutions and social order into being. But the second thing, being human demands having a sense of meaning and purpose and identity. We must have meaning in order to live. Life without any meaning becomes impossible, just as it is impossible to live without a society. If society itself is to survive, and if the institutions of the society are to survive, they must be invested with purpose and meaning. Now, the greatest threat to meaning is death itself. Death is not just something that we meet at the end of life. Death is something that accompanies a human being throughout the entire journey of life. A couple of scholars have put it this way: that death casts its shadow over all human existence. Another says knowledge of death intrinsically determines the whole of life. In this knowledge, death is already present in human life. So that one great philosopher even describes human existence, or man himself as a being, toward death. Now, death brings disorder and dissolution. It always threatens to reduce human achievements to nothing and to rob life of any meaning. For instance, you can add up all your achievements. Get your calculator out. Do a little exercise. Supposing I say I want you to do some arithmetic. All right, put 100 down there. Yes, you put 100. Now add another 50. Now add 1,000. Here's a greater achievement. Multiply it by 2. Then multiply it by 3. And add up this and do this. Now, are you ready? Multiply it by nothing. What's your score? It's nothing. So if you go through life and you add this and do this, and here's a great achievement, and this one's worth 1,000 points, and here you've doubled yourself, multiply that by 2, and then the final score, the final line, is you multiply it by nothing. If death is the end, then you must multiply everything by nothing. What is life worth? It's not worth anything. It has no meaning, and it has no purpose. This is what man is threatened with. And therefore, if a life ends in nothing, it is worth nothing. And the security and the order and continuity of society itself is threatened by death. Now, a sociologist has brilliantly stated, religion is the audacious attempt to conceive of the entire universe as being humanly significant. In religion, the inherently precarious and transitory constructions of human activity are given the semblance of ultimate security and permanence. Religion is the establishment, through human activity, of an all-embracing sacred order that is of a sacred cosmos and will be capable of maintaining itself in the ever-present face of chaos. Every human society, however legitimated, must maintain its solidarity in the face of chaos. Every human being or every human society is, in the last resort, men banded together in the face of death. The power of religion depends, in the last resort, upon the credibility of the banners it puts into the hands of men as they stand before death, or more accurately, as they walk inevitably toward it. Every human order is a community in the face of death. Theodicy, that is religion, represents the attempt to make a pact with death. And therefore, as long as death reigns, and human beings are threatened by it, they are incurably religious. Religion belongs where death reigns. That fact is recognized even by sociologists. The second point, religion is not a sign of God's presence, but it is in reality a sign of God's absence. When man has direct access to God again, as we put it in the first case, when death is overcome, of course, in the New Jerusalem, where there is no death, there is no religion, there is no temple, and when man has direct access to God, he is there in God's presence, there is no temple in the city. Present mortal existence is a state wherein humanity, in its sinfulness, has no direct contact with God. That's clear, isn't it? In our present mortal, sinful existence, We do not have direct contact with God. In fact, humanity cannot endure, does not desire any direct contact with God. This is illustrated in the story on Mount Sinai. And the children of Israel were gathered there, and the mountain was smoke and fire and the exhibition of the glory of God. And they cried out to Moses, "Let not God speak with us, or we die. You go and talk to us, not us. We need something here. We need something to mediate." And again, when Moses on another occasion came down from the mountain, his face was shining with the glory of God. The people could not look upon the glory of God. Moses understood what was going. Then he at first he didn't know why they were hiding from him, and then he understood what was the problem. And we have the story of putting a veil on his face in order that he could commune with the people. And Paul takes up the analogy. He said the real veil is on the heart. Mortal man, in his sinful condition, cannot endure, indeed, he does not want any direct access to God. And religion is like the veil. It prevents direct access to God and even shields humanity from immediacy. Religion has to do with what we will call this mediate state, where man actually takes the things of creation. He may take wood or stone or water or some element, something in the created order, and he uses something in the created order to somehow represent God or use it as a means of mediating an access to God. The present mortal life may therefore be described as a mediated state, and it is characterized by a mediated existence. Right? We don't have direct access. This life, I want to press the point, this life is a mediated state or a mediated existence, and religion is what man uses to mediate contact and access to God. Now, this mediated existence, it's interesting when you think about it. I want you to think about the phenomena of life, that life as we know it is a mediated kind of existence. Not only in the way, it's interesting to reflect on it, it's not only a mediated kind of existence in the way that we relate to God, it's even a mediated kind of existence in the way that we relate to one another. For instance, one of the mediators that we have in our earthly existence to talk to one another with is money. Now, have anybody of you ever conceived whether they're going to have dollars or whether they're going to have Deutschmarks up there in the New Jerusalem? What do you think they'll use? What do you think the standard of currency is going to be? Or the rate of exchange? Will it be on the gold standard, based on the gold in the street? Or do you think they'll have no use for money? Now, have you really thought about it, why that there is no concept of money in the New Jerusalem, but in this earth we have money? Now, you know, it often says that money talks. And so it does. And very often, instead of coming to face-to-face contact with a person when we want to talk with him or talk to him and convey a message to him, we don't confront him face-to-face and tell him what we really want to say. We mediate our message with money. Let me give you an illustration. I want to come to this fellow here and I want to say, I want you to know that I am a very important person. I'm a very powerful man. I'm somebody to take into account. Now, who would come up to another fella and say that to him, to his face? But I have a wonderful mediator. I can take money, and money will say that to him far, far more effectively than I could say to his face. Can't it? Money will do all sorts of other talk. I might come to this man and say, I really am saying, I want to say, I don't care for you. I don't want to know you. But I want you to serve me, to be my lackey, to do something for me. I can appreciate your help. I don't appreciate you, but I really want your help. Now, who would be so insulting to say that to this man's face? But money can do it. I can go with money and give him money, and money will talk to him so effectively that without even gaining his friendship or anything at all, or showing any interest in this man, he will come and do what I want him to do. And to that measure, maybe I can control his life. Money's very, very powerful mediator. It talks. Now, of course, money can say good things as well as bad things. Money can say, I care for you. I want to help you. Money can say things like that. But money is very much, very, very much a part of mortal, or what I will call, money is very much a part of mediated existence. Just as we talk to God with and through. What do we use to reach God with? We cut off. How are we going to mediate to Him? How are we going to get to Him? How are we going to talk to Him? Well, you see, I talk to my fellow man with money. But actually, I talk to God through religion. Now, you can call that funny money, if you like. There's this money and there's the funny money. Religion is like the funny money that you talk to God with. And you know, there's a wonderful connection between that money and the other money. Religion and money are often not very far apart. Anything knows about religion, especially organised religion, the real money and the funny money are always somewhere there together. Oh, yes. Now, there's another way we talk to one another in our mediated existence. We use institutions to talk to one another. We don't always deal directly face to face with one another, but because we live in a mediated existence, sometimes we find it more convenient, indeed it may be necessary, to help people or to grind them and crush them up by doing it through an institution. Institutions are very convenient. I mean, there's many of us will not come to a person and say, I want to grind you to powder. I mean, we're too kind to do things like that and to say it face to face. But you see, through an institution, you can sort of relieve yourself of the responsibility and use the handles and levers of an institution's and the power structure to take this man and really grind him to powder. And all the time, of course, we wouldn't lift a finger and do a nasty thing. That's what happens. That's what happens in the mediated state. And there's another thing. That is part of the mediated state is sexuality, when you think about it. Human sexuality. Now, human sexuality is a very, very potent force and important factor in all human existence. And what sexuality does is take some of the deepest thoughts or feelings of the human heart and things that are really beyond expression and can express them for good or for bad. It can express tenderness, affection and sharing and commitment, but it can, as we know, express hostility and aggression and the desire to subordinate and the desire to use, exploit, or the reverse side, the desire to be masochistic and to be subordinated. And thus man can mediate both his good and his evil through human sexuality. Now, I don't know what you believe on the next life, but if we're going to take the words of Jesus seriously, in the final redeemed state, there is no human sexuality. Now, I'm too bad maybe to tell some of you that. You might be a bit disappointed. Well, you'll have to opt for the Muslim paradise. They have plenty of that there. Or the Mormon one. Right. But I use those things to illustrate factors of man's mediated existence. But I'm largely concerned, of course, is the mediated existence. You see, we are cut off from this direct access to God, and having no direct access to God, and threatened by death and chaos and discontinuity and so on, we are driven to religion, and we need something. We have to use something, some means by which we have to talk to God and overcome the threat of death. And this means is religion. And of course, if you think about it, it even makes a lot of fun, but relating. You think of the mixture you got there. You got religion and money, you know, the mystique, something mysterious here, the supernatural element somewhere, and then that's religion. And then you've got money, and then you've got sexuality, and then you've got death, and you mix them all together. Don't you have a great story? You know, anybody who's going to grip people, write a novel, have a TV show. Aren't they the vital ingredients that get people in? People are preoccupied with death. I was reading a book. Just since over here, someone was kind enough to send me this book to me, and I got into it, and I was telling about the days of the England at the end of the 18th century and the public hangings and all the crime that was going on in London, petty crime. And they used to hang people for, you know, stealing a few loaves of bread. And they used to have public hangings, especially for the pickpockets. Pickpocket, if you picked anyone's pocket, you were hanged. And they used to have 40,000 people, 80,000 people come. It was the big sporting event, the public hangings. And people were absolutely engrossed in this. It was a tremendous carnival atmosphere on the day of the public hangings for the pickpockets. And do you know when most people picked pockets? Well, the hanging was going on. That's when they picked the pockets. All right. The mediated state. Religion belongs, it clearly belongs to the mediated existence. While people remain excluded from direct contact with the world of transcendental reality, that is the reality of God or the gods, as long as they are excluded from direct contact, they are driven to use created things to represent the presence of the divine or to mediate contact with the gods. There are no peoples on earth among whom religion does not exist, because in this mediated life, people everywhere are incurably religious. We look at the religion in the ancient world. Firstly, the religion of Israel's neighbours. And I want to sort of give you just a brief overview of what the religion of Israel's neighbours were like. And the two great centres of the world at that time was Mesopotamia and Egypt. Now, these ancients conceived of a supernatural world and the natural world. They existed together in some sort of harmony where the natural order of the world, the seen cosmos, was somehow embedded into the supernatural and the unseen cosmos. One impenetrated the other. And the order and the continuity of this cosmos depended upon it being rightly related to the supernatural cosmos. And somehow they saw that these two worlds were so impregnated that there was something of the divine, this mysterious cosmos, of the supernatural cosmos, could be seen in the natural cosmos. So there was something of the gods and the gods' activity in the things that you could see, in the sun and the moon, or the trees or the animals, and especially in the cycle of nature, especially as expressed in the fertility cycle. There was something mysterious and of the gods and of the supernatural. It was important to them to maintain this continuity by religious ritual, by observing carefully the taboos and avoiding misdeeds. For instance, the failure to perform the right ritual or to avoid the taboo or a misdeed might throw this cosmos out of the being embedded out of the harmony with the supernatural world, that for instance, the river of Egypt might flood, there may be an earthquake, there may be a terrible calamity, and so on. So to be irreligious, not to observe the ritual, not to be careful about the taboos and so on, not to continue this religious existence, and you know the word religion from the Latin means to be careful, not to carefully, observe this ritual and avoid this taboo and do this, not to keep up the religion, you see, not to be involved in this, was to expose not only yourself but the whole society to the anger of the gods. It was to threaten the whole order with chaos and disintegration. And of course religion was always used, as it always has been used, religion is used then to legitimate, that is to justify, the existing social order, whatever it is. The king and the monarch and the priesthood and everything is order and continuity and preservation. Otherwise, if you don't keep this religion going, everything is going to go into chaos. One is well written, I'll read you this quotation to describe this ancient religion, because it's important to see its relation to Israel and what the enticing, the attractive features of it. Says Berger in his book on the sociology of religion, one point that should be strongly emphasized is that this sort of universe is one of great security for the individual. It's one of great security. Put negatively, it is a universe furnishing highly effective barriers against anomaly, that is, breakdown, chaos. This does not mean at all that nothing terrible could happen to the individual, that he's guaranteed perennial happiness. It does mean that whatever happens, whatever terrible, makes sense to him by being related to the ultimate meaning of things. Only as this point is grasped can we understand the persistent attractiveness of the various versions of this worldview to the Israelites, even long after their own religious development had decisively broken with it. Thus, for instance, it would be very misleading to think that the persistent attraction of sacred prostitution, against which the spokesman of Yahweh thundered for centuries, was a matter of mundane lust. After all, we may assume that there were plenty of non-sacred prostitutes around, to which it seems Yahweh's objections were minimal. The attraction rather lay in an altogether religious desire, namely in the nostalgia for the continuity between man and the cosmos that was sacramentally mediated. It was this great system that took care of them from the cradle to the grave. This elaborate religious apparatus. Now, the birth of the Hebrew nation was the result of a twofold exodus. The exodus of Abraham from Mesopotamia and the exodus of Moses from Egypt. And both cases, we must see these exoduses, which are really part of the one. It is an exodus from the world of religion. It was very much a religious exodus. What was the nature of their religious exodus? the fathers of the Hebrew nation, above everything else, were possessed of a vision of a one single transcendent God called Yahweh. Now I want to stress the meaning of this transcendency of God. Although there's a lot of work being done to demonstrate, I think beyond reasonable doubt, that Israel borrowed a lot from the nations around them, and the creation stories were borrowed from the mythological stories that then existed in Babylonia and Egypt. We must nevertheless not allow that type of knowledge to overshadow something else, the very stark contrast between the presentation in the Israelite account in the Bible than what we find in the other religions around. When they borrowed those stories, they rewrote them, they reworked them in the setting of their vision of the one transcendent God. And in all the other creation stories, when the gods create, or whatever it is, however the story is told of Marduk and how he made the world and so on, somehow Marduk is involved in the world, he's immanent to the world in such a way that you lose any clear distinction between the Creator and the things that are made. But in the biblical story, there's always this very stark contrast. God is the self-existent one. There he stands, without spouse, without offspring, without pantheon. The one transcendent God stands over against the world. He's always above it. He's always completely separate. He is always the wholly other. And he makes a man. And between God and this man, between this transcendent God who is in heaven, the wholly other, and this man that he has made, between the two stands a desacralized world. There is nothing of God immanent in the things that he has made. He's not in the grass, he's not in the sun, he's not in the moon, he's not in the animals, he's not in the fertility cycle. The world is desacralized. Nothing of God is in the things that are made, and nothing in the visible order can be used to make an image of God, because he is wholly transcendent in heaven, man is in earth, and between, we say again, this transcendent vision of Yahweh. Abraham and Israel were about a religious exodus from the world view, the religion of that ancient world. And compared with their neighbours, the religion of Abraham, because there was some religion. I'm not suggesting there was a complete exodus here from all religion, and I want to come to that in a moment. But compared with the elaborate religious system of the world, of Mesopotamia, the great centers of culture in Egypt and so on, the religion of Israel was impoverished. It was simple to the point of being austere. It's like a building that's hardly furnished. It seemed to them as an exodus from all religion, such impoverishment, to go out into a kind of an existence where you haven't got all those. It was just like Sarah's tent, you know. She must have missed all the goodies there in that tent of Abraham's. That's what the religion of Israel is like, compared with the religion of their neighbours. But Israel could not, in this journey through history at this stage dispense with all religion. Now, historians who deal with this great process and the distinction on and the history of religion and so on, they say that this faith of Abraham, this faith of Moses in the one transcendent God who stands above the world, this initiates in human history the great process called secularism, or the great process of desacralizing the world. This is where it takes place in history. God is not immanent to the things which he has made. He is seen to be as distinct and so on. The great process of the desacralization of the world begins with the faith of Israel. But even then, even Israel was not able to dispense with religion altogether. And the process of desacralization was not completed in the birth of the Hebrew nation. And we ask ourselves, why not? Because in their vision of the transcendent God, they could not transcend space. And they looked for a future redemption, when God would come and establish his kingdom upon earth. And they looked for a time when this transcendent God would transcend space and establish his kingdom on earth, and the end time redemption would come, however they conceived of that. So as far as they were concerned and what they could see, time and space, or space and time, was not transcended. And because it was not transcended in their consciousness, we find in the religion of Israel the sacralization of space. What's sacralization mean? Have you got the point? What is the sacralized space mean? To make space sacred. They take space and make it sacred. And I want to show that the essence of religion of Israel, although it was greatly austere and simplified, they had to maintain, they had to preserve the sacralization of space and time. First, where's the sacralization of space? They take a land, and what do they say about the land? This space is sacred. Now, as we dealt with in recent issues of Verdict, and we recommend the book of The Verdict to read Bullman, that scholar on the presentation of world history about the chosen peoples. Every religion actually had their vision that they were the chosen people and this was the God's own country. You know, there's a lot of Americans think America's God's own country, don't they? They don't know Australia's the lucky country. So Israel has some sacred space. Now, in this sacred space, there must be a place whereby they can contact God. And all the cultures around them, in every one of them, they all had their sacred mountain. And if they lived on the plain and they didn't have a mountain, they'd start to build one. You see, because it's like they have to have a sacred mountain where somehow God can come down, or the gods can come down, and somehow, like electricity strikes the mountain sometime, that's where God's going to strike the earth. And there's a lot of interesting material. The ancient world called these sacred mountains, they called them the navel of the earth. And each religion had their navel. The very center of the earth, the very mountain or the thing that they builded, this was the navel of the earth. This is where they were going to make contact with the divine. And here's Israel. It too must have a sacred mountain. It has, in the mythology of all the nations around them, it too has a navel of the earth, whereby somehow on this mountain, this is where they will make special contact with Yahweh. And then there must be a temple. And they must have some sacred space. And it must be designated that this is holy and this is most holy. And you have the designation of the sacred space in Israel's religion. You have a temple cult and a temple service. Then there must also be, because time is not transcended, they are still waiting for the coming redemption, what is going to transcend time? What is going to bring them, as it were, something and mediate to them something of that which they hope for in a future time? They must have sacred time. Of course, the ancients, they all had their taboo days and their non-taboo days, so Israel sacralizes time as well as space. These days are holy, and certain things are not to be done on these days, and these days are profane days. There was the weekly, there was the monthly, and there was the yearly sacramentalization of time. And then if you have the sacred space and the sacred time, that of course leads inevitably to the sacred people, doesn't it? The sacred people are those who are preserving. They live within the sacred space. They preserve it, and they preserve the sacredness of the space by carefully observing the sacred time and all the other distinctions that you come in between the clean and the unclean, between the common days and the profane days, and the sacred space and the non-sacred space. And thus you have the sacred people and those who are especially sacred with a hierarchy of sacredness. The high priest is especially sacred above everything else, and then there's the ordinary priest, and then it's the Levites, and then it's the ordinary people. But even they, compared with those outside, even the ordinary people are sacred. But there's not as sacred as the Levite or as the priest or as the high priest. The sacralization of space and time is the essence of the faith of Israel in the Old Testament. And throughout their history, sometimes their religion, which was supposed to be much simplified and set in course the world's history towards a desacralized world, as we will see later. Even Israel at times became bogged down in their religion, and they were being swallowed up by it. In fact, they weren't really different from the other people around. And they were losing the point. And these prophets arose. And the interesting thing about the prophets who rose in Israel's history, they thundered against religion, didn't they? They said, God doesn't want sacrifice. Take away your fat of rams and this and that. Take them all out of my courts. And as for your Sabbath days and feast days, I can't tolerate them. That's not what I want, says Yahweh. Well, what does God want? Well, Micah says he wants justice and he wants mercy and he wants you to walk humbly with God. Basically, there's no religion in there. And in the prophets, they don't extol religion. They're really down on it. I mean, here's the law of Moses that says you must offer sacrifice. And the prophet comes along and says God doesn't want sacrifice. You can see a sort of a conflict, a tension there, can't you? But as historians point out, and rightly so on this question, what the prophets do is keep alive the vision of Abraham and Moses of a desacralized world, and they keep moving the great development through history. But as long as space has not been transcended, and as long as time has not been transcended, until that time takes place, until that fullness of time has arrived, Israel is stuck with the law of Moses. It is stuck with the sacralization of space and time until, as we'll see in our next session, it is entirely overcome and it is removed by the coming.